you may know that a federal election was called on, I think, Wednesday. Ever since, all party leaders have been crisscrossing the country, seeking to connect with voters and to share their platforms so that you'll vote for their party on October the 21st. I think it's worthy to note that all of the four major party leaders, Justin Trudeau, Andrew Scheer, Jagmeet Singh, and Elizabeth May, they all identify with a particular faith tradition. Trudeau and Scheer are both professing Roman Catholics. Singh is a practicing Sikh, and Elizabeth May is an Anglican, having planned to become an Anglican priest before actually entering into politics. Now, speaking of Elizabeth May, maybe you heard about her interview this past week in which she said that her personal hero was Jesus Christ. But it's not as simple as that, right? In an interview with a CBC journalist, May was asked, among other questions, who her personal hero was. And she answered, Jesus Christ. But then she added, sorry, that's my answer. When the interviewer asked, well, why she chose Jesus, May replied, because he led a revolution that was nonviolent. He inspired people, that it's been 2,000 years, and she said, I rely on his advice a lot. Then the interviewer said, well, why did you say sorry when you answered? And May responded that politicians in Canada shouldn't put their religion on their sleeve. She said, I gave you my quick, honest answer. I didn't self-edit, she said. Then she was asked why politicians shouldn't put their religious beliefs on their sleeve. And May's response was that because we're an all-inclusive and all-embracing society, within the Green Party, May said, we have candidates from every faith and every religion, and lots who don't believe in a God and wonder why anyone would be as foolish as to think so. And everyone is respected and welcome in our party. But apparently, in this party of inclusion, where everyone is respected and welcome, the leader can't speak about her personal faith without apologizing for it, without self-editing. Now, that's a quintessentially Canadian response around religion, isn't it? And we're famous around the world as the people who say sorry a lot, right? We are quite often apologetic when it comes to talking about our personal religious faith. You know, both Trudeau and Scheer acknowledge their Roman Catholic faith, but they go to pains to let everybody know that their personal faith will not affect their public policy. I suppose Jagmeet Singh is the same, although I've never heard him speak about his faith directly. It's so different, isn't it, from our neighbors down in the South, in the United States. Remember, Donald Trump has self-identified as a Presbyterian. Now, there's a time when someone should have been self-editing. But the way religious faith is spoken of in the U.S. and the way it's spoken of here in Canada, especially in our politics, it's really quite different, isn't it? You know, Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, as he's known, he's a young Democratic candidate for president. He's an openly gay man, but he's also very open about his religious faith. He's an Episcopalian. That's a fancy word for saying Anglican, right? He's an American Anglican. Joe Biden, Roman Catholic. Elizabeth Warren, Methodist. Bernie Sanders, Jewish. And on it goes. Every one of the candidates that are running for the Democratic nomination for president, I think with the exception of one, has some clear affiliation with a religious faith tradition. It almost raises suspicion in the United States politically if you actually don't identify with faith. But in Canada, I think Elizabeth May is probably right that we don't put our religion on our sleeve. And you know what? It's not just politicians. It's not just politicians. I think it's most of us as well, isn't it? It's most of us as well. And that's a bit of a problem. It's a bit of a problem. Mainline Christians, like Presbyterians, we're somewhat or downright suspicious of people who do wear their faith on their sleeve. We've seen too many bad examples of evangelism, right? Evangelism rooted in judgment and not grace, rooted in fear and not love, rooted on the promise of prosperity. People get turned off by inappropriate or obnoxious forms of evangelism. And so we start neglecting it altogether. But you know, for Jesus, reaching people was his priority. Reaching people was his priority. Calling people to follow him in the ways of his kingdom that he spoke about was his ministry. It was Jesus who said that the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. And the extent to which he would go to do just that is made clear in our reading from the Gospel according to Luke this morning. And as always, the context is really important, right? You gotta set the text within the context. The text begins by saying all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him, to Jesus. And the Pharisees and scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners, and he eats with them." And so Jesus told them a parable. Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and goes after the one until he finds it? Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, doesn't light a lamp, sweeps the whole house and searches carefully until she finds it? Well, I mean, honestly, if Jesus was asking that question to us, the simple answer to his question would be, well, most of us. You know, if you ask us, which one of you wouldn't leave the 99 sheep by themselves to go look and find the one lost sheep? Most of us would say, well, that would be me. I don't think I better leave the 99 alone to go look after the one that's lost. That's kind of poor shepherding. It's poor stewardship, you know? If you leave the 99 sheep alone in the wilderness while you go hunting after that one renegade sheep, how many sheep will be left when you come back after the wolves have had their fill? Who would really want to turn a whole house upside down to find one lost coin? You know, it's probably not worth the cost of the oil burned trying to find it. Especially, you know what's in the house, it's going to churn up. They're like lost keys. You know they're going to churn up at some point, right? Why go through all the effort? It's just not worth the effort. But it is to Jesus, and it is to God. Listen to what he says. Listen to what Jesus says. When the shepherd finds the lost sheep, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. He calls his friends and neighbors together, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I found my sheep that was lost." Really? Really? I mean, shouldn't the shepherd just be happy that he didn't lose any more sheep after leaving them in the wilderness to go after the lost one? If I were the shepherd and I had to go looking for that stupid lost sheep, the only thing that I might say when I came home with that sheep on my shoulders would be, "We're having lamb chops for dinner." What's with all this rejoicing? What's with all this rejoicing? And also with the woman that calls together all of her friends and neighbors saying, "Rejoice with me, for I found my one lost coin." Really? Big deal. Big deal. So you found your coin that you lost. You want to throw a big party for that? Why are you calling me over? I don't need to know this. But Jesus says, "I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." There is joy in heaven. There is joy in heaven over the one lost who is found. Think about those who were with Jesus. Remember the context? Think about those who were with Jesus when he was speaking. Imagine what the Pharisees and the scribes must have been thinking. Shouldn't you be looking after the 99 sheep that aren't lost? That aren't lost? Shouldn't you be thinking about what you're going to do with the 9 coins you still have? Why waste the time and effort and energy on the one lost one? You start going after lost sheep out there, and before you know it, you won't have any sheep here to come home to. Get your priorities straight. Take care of what you already have. Don't risk so much to find those who get lost. I mean, think of it as collateral damage, right? Think of it as acceptable losses. Think of it as the cost of doing business. There's always going to be a few that get lost. Just the way it goes. Except those collateral damages, those acceptable losses, they were right there with the Pharisees, scribes, listening to Jesus. Those tax collectors and those sinners of all stripes, they were there listening to Jesus. And what are they thinking? What are they thinking? Wait a minute, you're saying, Jesus, that God is like a shepherd who would risk it all to look for me? Is that what you're saying? You're saying God is like a woman who would turn her home upside down just to find me? And when she does, she invites everyone to rejoice with her? God would risk it all for me? Is that what you're saying? And then not only would God risk it all for me, God would celebrate in the finding and invite others to rejoice. Imagine how good that news must have been to the tax collectors, sinners in the crowd. And then remember that each and every one of us, no matter how often we can be like Pharisees, be like the scribes, on the right side of the law, from the right side of the tracks, we who are insiders, we who know the way, remember how often that we can also find ourselves suddenly on the outside with those who are lost. Remember that we need finding. We need a shepherd who would risk it all for us, right? We need a shepherd who would risk it all for us. We need someone who would leave no stone unturned, no corner of the room unswept to find us. And then to rejoice in that finding. This is good news. This is good news. This is such good news that it is just too good to keep to ourselves, right? If we believe in this kind of God, how is it that we would want to keep this good news only to ourselves? We live in a world that is hungry. People full of hunger for good news. For someone to tell them that they're loved, that they're worth caring for, that someone would risk it all for them, that there will be rejoicing when they are found. You know, there are probably more people than we know who need to hear that they aren't just collateral damage. Right? You're not just collateral damage. You're not just damaged goods. You're not just acceptable losses. You're not just part of the cost of doing business in our society. There's probably more people than we know who feel that way. That their mistakes, that their poor choices don't condemn them forever. That there is someone who is still seeking them, looking for them, seeking them so that he can bring them back to the fold, to rejoice in their finding. People are hurting because they feel isolated, because they think that they've done something from which there is no return, no restoration, no redemption, that they just aren't worth saving, that no one would risk anything for them. But the good news is that God would. The good news is that God would, and that God does, and that in Jesus Christ God has. And through the people of God, through us, God continues to seek the lost. But friends, it is a message that is way too good to keep only to ourselves. This is a message that is far too good for us just to keep to ourselves. Remember our motto? Deep with God, wide with the world, right? It's a cross, right? Deep with God, wide with the world. Deep with God, cross. At the center of that cross is Jesus, who mediates going deep with God, who mediates going wide with the world, right? But if we really want to go wide with the world, if we want to be a church that goes wide with the world, then we have to be ready to share the good news, to share our hope, to share the source of our joy. Sometimes I think the patron saint of Presbyterians is not St. Andrew, but actually St. Francis of Assisi. Right? St. Francis is attributed with a quote, "Preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words." Presbyterians love that. Right? We love that. Preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words. Eleanor loves that. I'm going to come up here and have her speak. No. We love that because it helps us to focus on the doing. We love to do. Terrified of speaking, though, right? Aren't we? We're scared of speaking. Going wide with the world, it does mean that we need to share the love of God. We have to share the love of God through our doing, through our actions, through our living, through our deeds. But there is a false dichotomy. There's a false dichotomy that says that our actions don't need our words. Right? It's false to say that our actions have nothing to do with our words. Jesus gave his disciples the great commandment, right? Love the Lord your God with everything that you are, heart, mind, soul, strength. And love your neighbor as you love yourselves. Great commandment. But he also gave the Great Commission to go and to make disciples, baptizing them and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded. Teaching them. Go and tell them. We don't get to choose which one we want to follow. Do we want to be people of the Great Commandment or a people of the Great Commission? Guess what? We are a people of both. People of God are a people of both the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. Jesus gave them both. And Jesus understands that unless our words and our actions line up, we don't really bear true witness to him, right? We can't just say God loves people and then do nothing about loving them ourselves. We can't just help people without sharing where our motivation comes from. You know, people aren't just a charitable cause. They're not just a thing to be helped. They are children of a God who never stops loving them, who never stops looking for them, who will leave the 99 to go seek the one, who will turn a house inside out to find the one lost coin, who will rejoice when the lost are found. It is news that is too good to keep only to ourselves. It's too good to keep only to ourselves. You know, if we want to go wide with the world, we need to get better at sharing the good news with people, right? It's scary stuff. It's the big E word, isn't it? Evangelism. But we need to get better at sharing the good news with people who have yet to hear of God's love for them. We can begin by engaging in what's called lifestyle evangelism. By living lives of love, grace, compassion, integrity, service, justice, people will see how we live our lives, and they might think, hey, you know what, if that's what Christianity looks like, well then maybe I'm interested. I'd like to learn more. It's a foothold, right? It's a foothold. It gets us in the door. We might engage in relational evangelism, sharing our faith naturally with those with whom we already have a relationship. You know, it's not a sales pitch. We're not trying to sell something. It's not being annoying and pressuring people, but rather it's a natural outflow of our relationship with them. It's about speaking about our faith in ways that let people know that our faith is important to us. Yeah, it's important to us. It grounds us. It gives us meaning and purpose. It helps us through hard times. It motivates us to serve others. Sharing our faith in this way can have a huge impact on people. You know what? People are not as resistant to our sharing of our faith as we might think. I think we've scared ourselves into thinking that if we start sharing our faith, people will get, ugh, don't tell me that. You know, even if they don't believe in God, even if people don't believe in God, our credibility as a friend, as a relative, as someone who has gained their trust and earned their confidence, gives us the opportunity to be heard. Often, like Elizabeth May, we apologize for bringing up our faith when no one is offended. Right? We apologize for bringing up our faith, for speaking about Jesus when no one is offended. Finally, we can engage in an invitational evangelism. Invitational evangelism. That's when we talk to people and say, why don't you come and see? Come and see. Join us at a church service. Join us at a church event. Join us for a small group or a Bible study. Again, we might feel embarrassed to invite or to share or to invite people, but study after study after study shows us that about 90% of people first visit a church because someone they know invited them. Maybe you're here because of that. Maybe you're here because someone invited you. You already have a relationship with people. To the extent that you think that you might be able to share an invitation with them, it's highly unlikely that such an invitation would be seen as inappropriate. They may choose not to come. They may say, thanks for the invitation, but I'm not interested. But again, given our prior relationship with them, it's unlikely that they're going to be offended by your invitation. There was a man who was once asked, is Jesus Christ your personal Savior? He replied, no, I prefer to share him. Is Jesus Christ your personal Savior? Well, I prefer to share him. The theologian Jim Wallace said, faith is always personal, but it's never private. Hear that again? Faith is always personal, but it's never private. We live out our faith publicly because we know that the good news is just too good to keep to ourselves, right? It's too good to keep to ourselves. We share Jesus and his love for all people, especially those who think that they're unlovable, that they're unredeemable, that they aren't worth it. Jesus wants us to rejoice because one lost soul has returned home. One lost person created in God's image knows that they are a child of God. This is our calling. This is our calling as a church, as the people of God, as disciples of Jesus Christ, to share that good news, to live, to work, to speak as a community that shares the wonderful news of God's unceasing love God's relentless chasing and seeking after us. Our good news as a church is that we need to share that God wants to rejoice even when one lost one is found. Do we want to be a church that goes deep with God and wide with the world? If we say yes, then we can't be afraid to speak about the one who is the source of our rejoicing. We cannot be afraid to speak about the one who is the source of our rejoicing, the one who found us when we were lost, the one who seeks everyone whom he loves. If we do that, if we as a church do that, if we as individuals do that with integrity and with grace, we won't need to apologize or self-edit. We just need to share Jesus confidently, lovingly, and graciously. And we need to trust that the one who loves and welcomes sinners and eats with them will fill us with his peace and with his presence, both this day and always. Thanks be to God. Amen.